Hi everyone, I'm Jack Crawford, and it's time to review Death Stranding by Kojima Productions. So, I've never been the biggest Kojima fan, but there's a lot that I like about the earlier Metal Gear games in particular. He's one of the few people making truly unique big budget games these days. And yeah, compared to most AAA games, Death Stranding is absolutely packed with interesting ideas. This is a game that has a lot to say about a lot of topics. Obviously, the central theme is about connection and intimacy and touch, but the game also explores related ideas, stuff about trust and distrust, death and accepting death, the nature of consciousness, AI. All of these themes and the ways they're connected in this game are genuinely interesting, and the game has a lot to say about them. Kojima's signature style is definitely on full display here, and for me, that only works some of the time. I enjoy the insane over-the-top twists, the fake-outs, the tongue-in-cheek funny moments that you expect from a Kojima game. Stuff like the ridiculous Monster Energy product placement that makes no sense at all. But I definitely could have done without the extremely on-the-nose names he uses, like BB, Mama, Dead Man, Die Hard Man. Generally, I would have liked the messaging and themes to have been a lot more subtle. There were probably over a dozen times I laughed out loud because of how hard they were hitting me over the head with the theme. But still, I can accept all of that as part of Kojima's style. What I cannot tolerate, though, is the moment-to-moment writing. I would say maybe 1/3 of this game is composed of cutscenes, and I'm not diametrically opposed to long cutscenes in games the way some people are, but if you're gonna have 7 hours of cutscenes in your game, I want them to be enjoyable. The opening scenes actually made me really optimistic. The first thing you see is this beautiful scenery which establishes the mood and the setting. Then it introduces the protagonist in action. Then it starts to introduce some of the weird fantasy elements like timefall and BTs. It even introduces Fragile jumping to the beach in a way that I thought was exciting. It does all of this wordlessly. The camera is moving in interesting ways. There's just a lot of stuff happening visually. It's an engaging scene to watch. Unfortunately, this turns out to be not representative at all. The game is full of these completely unengaging scenes. Characters talking in the same boring room over and over again. Or just characters talking to a stationary hologram. Sometimes you just have to watch Sam's blank stare when a character calls and gives him a monologue. The dialogue is often extremely awkward. There are really frequent timing issues that just make it sound like no real conversation ever. Some of the performances are straight up bad. The actors don't strike a natural tone at all. And to be fair, the material they were given to work with is definitely the main problem. But even when there's no dialogue, the game has a lot of close-up shots of characters' faces, which really highlight how bad some of these performances are. And not only is the dialogue bad, there is way too much of it for a couple of reasons. The first is that this game loves repeating information to you. So much of what's communicated to the player in cutscene dialogue is also communicated at least one other way, whether that's in the pre-mission briefing calls, the mission briefings themselves, mail that you get from other characters, or the interviews that you unlock. I really hate when games waste my time. And I hate when games treat me like an idiot. Excessive repetition like this accomplishes both of those goals at once. It's especially bad toward the beginning of the game. There's so much dialogue explaining the mechanics. It often makes no sense at all. Like, Sam is supposed to be an expert porter, so why is Die Hard Man explaining to him the absolute basics of his job? The even bigger issue with the dialogue, though, is the ungodly amount of time they spend explaining the made-up science of this world. And again, this often makes no sense. In the opening scenes, we see Igor explaining to Sam all of this stuff that he should definitely already know after living in this world his whole life. My excitement about this game peaked when I knew almost nothing. I loved the mystery of the trailers. They could have just put me in this world and let me figure things out for myself and guess at what's going on. Instead, I have to sit through these granular, repetitive explanations of every little thing. About half of the story in this game reminds me of the cringy midichlorian explanation scene from Star Wars Episode 1. And the thing is, the mails and the interviews that I mentioned are the perfect place to include a little bit of that information for the players who want to really dig deep into the lore. Putting all that info in cutscenes just makes the cutscenes worse, and it makes the experience of digging through the lore worse because you've heard all that information already. You also hear a lot of the same generic, empty writing over and over again. Hey, Sam, thanks for linking us up to the network. Everything's great now. That kind of thing. And I get the idea that this was supposed to be kind of annoying as part of the message of the game, but I definitely would have preferred if this had been communicated in a less tedious way. Anyway, finally getting into the gameplay here. One thing that I really liked was how well the gameplay reflects the themes. I like that items are slowly unlocked as you connect more people because they're all contributing in their own way. I like how you get linked to more and more players as the game goes on. I like how the game encourages you to avoid hurting other characters. This game is very tactile. You have to do things like gripping the shoulder buttons to stabilize your cargo, which creates this nice parallel between your movements and Sam's movements. The game simulates a lot of human bodily functions like fatigue, holding your breath, adrenaline, even peeing and pooping. It's funny, but it also fits in really well with the themes. All of that is just you as the player building intimacy with Sam. Which kind of makes sense because Kojima loves breaking the fourth wall and making the player a part of the game. Even in cutscenes, there's a lot of vibration to emphasize touch. Even for something as small as a character handing something to Sam, you'll get a small vibration. I also really like the idea of the core gameplay being about walking and balancing packages. And at its best, when I'm carrying a ton of cargo and I'm struggling to get to where I need to go, it does feel nice. I think it could have been done a lot better though. The main problem is, it's always way too easy to balance. I think the controls should have been a lot more involved. I would have loved if they'd found a way to give you control of balancing forward and backward as well as left and right. Obviously that would have been kind of hard to work into the control scheme, but the point is it just needed something to make it a little bit more engaging. I also think the balancing mechanic should have been more central to the game as a whole. It's really only a concern when you're walking, and it feels odd when you climb a ladder or crouch, for instance, and suddenly the cargo is a complete non-issue. I think it would have been really exciting if you had to sneak past enemies and balance cargo at the same time. Instead, the game trades one type of tension for another, and it ends up making the enemy encounters feel pretty lame and tedious. But the gameplay definitely isn't all about balancing. This game has you do a lot of different things at different times. The majority of this game is maybe best described as an immersive sim. It puts you in this big world and gives you a bunch of items to play with. And the items themselves are decent, but the game rarely encourages you to use them at all. Stuff like ladders and climbing anchors were way less important than I expected. Even when I found one that another player placed, it was usually a toss-up whether it was worth using or not. Or it was clearly slower to use it. Then once vehicles are introduced, there is no turning back. The vehicles in this game, especially the bike, are too powerful. It's just silly how you can scale these steep mountains on the bike. And even the truck has this crazy jump that it did not need. They could have made the bike less powerful by adding just a little bit of cargo balancing, like maybe you'll drop some cargo if it's stacked up really high and you take a super sharp turn or bump something hard. That also would have incentivized using the truck more to keep your cargo safe. I also rarely felt the need to use the weaponry since you can just drive straight through the middle of enemy camps. I played this game on hard mode and the enemies averaged about 10 IQ points. Even when I crashed and came to a full stop in the middle of their camp, they were rarely able to stop me. At the end of the day, I think the most interesting decision this game gave me was whether I should grind for hours, building a complex network of structures to cut out 90% of the gameplay. To me, that means this game failed entirely as an immersive sim. In some ways, this game is pretty polished, but there seemingly wasn't enough design polish to go around. The scanner that indicates the direction of BTs is often not visible because it goes into the cargo. This is extra goofy because it's not really supposed to be this robotic mechanical thing. It's supposed to be your BB's way of communicating with you. You see it do lots of complex human-like movements like a thumbs up and a wave. There were lots of audio issues that often boil down to the game not really being aware of what's going on. The dialogue is often too quiet when other things are happening, like in the clip at the beginning of this video. And there were so many times when I walked a long distance all at once and the game could have played an entire song, but for some reason, the vast majority of the time it chooses to play a song, I'm about to turn in an order. This causes the dialogue and the sound effects to be drastically decreased in volume, even though the music has temporarily stopped. The menu UI design is pretty baffling sometimes. Some text boxes auto-scroll for no reason, making them really hard to read. There are text boxes that scroll like 1 pixel for some reason. And it should not take as long as it does to find the unread entries in the data menu. I have a ton of these kind of complaints, but I'll just stop there. Unsurprisingly, the optional content in this game is mostly just about doing standard orders a bunch and maxing out your connection levels. It's obviously filler, and that's made even more obvious by the terrible cookie-cutter dialogue you get at every location, with the most phoned-in or just bad performances imaginable with very few exceptions. I would have preferred if the standard orders and the connection levels didn't exist at all, since so little effort was put into making them rewarding. All that player effort spent doing standard orders could have gone towards doing orders for other players, which would have done a lot to reinforce the point of this game. On top of the standard orders, there are a few parts of the main game that could have been shortened as well, and especially the unnecessary optional orders for Sam. I really like what they did with one of these in particular, but the majority of them are not worthwhile. They're barely more interesting than standard orders. But for the most part, I don't think the main game needed to be cut down. I think the gameplay just needed to be better. A more fleshed out and engaging balancing mechanic would have gone a long way, and an environment that better encouraged the use of all the different tools and structures would have gone a long way as well. Death Stranding is a disappointment for me because of how much I like the game in concept. They created this crazy, unique fantasy world, the framework of a good story is there, the unique gameplay was promising, but somehow in execution, this game fell flat for me in pretty much every way. I liked this game the most when I was watching the initial trailers. The more I played of it, the more disappointed I was. And I'm giving Death Stranding a 3 out of 10. And that's about it. Let me know what you thought of this one. I know there are people saying it's a masterpiece, people saying it's the worst game ever, and pretty much everything in between. So tell me what you think and why. And I'll see you guys next time.